Now, the sad news that the film star Val Kilmer, who played Batman, and Jim Morrison, as well as starring in Top Gun, has died at the age of 65.
When news of Val Kilmer's death broke, Hollywood paused, not just to grieve, but to reflect on a man who gave himself fully to every role. From Jim Morrison to Doc Holliday, Kilmer didn't just act, he disappeared into his characters. But one role always felt different, distant, untouchable. Before his death, Val Kilmer finally confirmed the truth about Batman Forever. And it wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't the critics. It wasn't the pressure. It was something heavier. A secret he was told to suppress. A burden he carried in silence. "They made me hide this," he once whispered to a friend. It was about a dream that became a prison, and the silent cost of becoming the Caped Crusader. And it started with the Batsuit. The Batman everyone had forgotten. In the mid-90s, the world of Gotham was shifting. Michael Keaton had famously hung up the cape after Batman Returns, walking away from a franchise that was quickly changing direction. With director Tim Burton also stepping back, Warner Brothers sought a new vision, something flashier, more marketable, and kid-friendly. Joel Schumacher stepped in, bringing a brighter palette, over-the-top villains, and a brand-new Dark Knight. Val Kilmer wasn't the obvious choice. In fact, he wasn't even on most people's radar. But Warner Brothers needed a leading man with serious acting chops. Someone who could carry the emotional complexity of Bruce Wayne while still appealing to younger audiences. Kilmer, coming off the success of Tombstone and The Doors, had the right mix of edge and charisma. But stepping into Batman's boots was no ordinary challenge. Kilmer was following a fan favorite in Keaton, whose mysterious and introverted portrayal had captivated audiences. The pressure wasn't just about box office performance. It was about legacy, and Warner Brothers made that crystal clear. They needed a Batman who could sell out theaters and toy aisles. Merchandise, branding, fast food tie-ins. Kilmer was no longer just an actor. He was the center of a billion-dollar marketing machine. Behind the scenes, Kilmer was deeply committed. He had actually accepted the role without reading the script, largely due to his admiration for Schumacher, who had previously worked with him on The Saint, 1997. Kilmer trusted Schumacher's vision and felt confident that he could bring something unique to the role, even without the script in hand. Kilmer studied the character with the seriousness of a Shakespearean lead. He wanted to explore the duality of Bruce Wayne, the orphan, the billionaire, the symbol. But very quickly, he began to realize that there was less room for interpretation and more demand for spectacle. The studio wanted Batman the icon, not Batman the man. Despite all of this, Batman Forever was a massive success. It grossed over $300 million worldwide and reignited public interest in the franchise. For Warner Brothers, Kilmer had done his job. He put on the suit, delivered the lines, and helped create a blockbuster. But success doesn't always tell the whole story. What the cameras didn't capture, what the interviews never touched, was how the role began to suffocate Kilmer. How each day on set became a battle not with villains or stunts, but with silence, discomfort, and a sense of erasure, because something was wrong. And it all started with the thing that defined the role itself. The suit. Behind the cowl, a hidden truth. At first, the Batsuit was a symbol of triumph. A childhood dream realized. For Val Kilmer, who had grown up idolizing superheroes, it felt like a full-circle moment. A chance to step into the myth, to live out a fantasy few ever touch. When he first laid eyes on the iconic suit, glistening under studio lights, he felt awe, pride, power, like a kid in front of the ultimate gift. But that feeling didn't last. The moment he put it on, something shifted. The suit, designed for visual impact and cinematic flair, was a marvel to look at, but a nightmare to wear. Weighing upwards of 50 pounds and made of thick, unforgiving rubber, it instantly transformed Kilmer from performer to prisoner. The cowl restricted his head movement. The chest plate crushed his breath. The boots made walking awkward, stiff. The suit had no ventilation. It trapped heat, soaked sweat, and left him drenched and drained by midday. And worst of all, he couldn't speak or hear clearly. Before long, people stopped talking to him, which he later described as very isolating. It was, as he would later describe it, like acting from inside a coffin. Kilmer, known for immersing himself into characters, found himself walled off from the very emotions he was hired to express. He couldn't emote through facial expressions. His voice was muffled. His physical movements were limited to stilted turns and unnatural gestures. The more he tried to bring Bruce Wayne to life, the more he felt buried by the suit that was supposed to define him. No one on set seemed to notice. The crew admired the way the costume looked on camera. The producers praised its silhouette. Warner Brothers was thrilled with the merchandise potential. Batman was everywhere. On lunchboxes, cereal boxes, action figures, and billboards. The image of Kilmer in the suit was a global sensation. But the man inside it? Invisible. There was one moment that cut deeper than the rest. One he never forgot. Warren Buffett, the billionaire investor and business magnate, had brought his grandkids to the set one afternoon. Everyone was excited. Buffett was a big deal, even in Hollywood. Kilmer, fully suited up and standing tall in his Batman regalia, prepared to meet them. As the children arrived, they gasped in delight. They ran toward him, eyes wide, voices rising, but something felt alienating to him. "They weren't talking to me," Kilmer recalled later. "They were talking to the suit." The children circled him with wonder, touching the bat emblem, tapping the utility belt, marveling at the armor, but they never looked him in the eye. They didn't say hello. They didn't ask questions. They spoke to Batman, not Val. That was the moment he understood. He wasn't playing Batman. He was wearing Batman. And no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried to inject soul into the role, none of it would ever reach the screen. It would all be masked, literally. His performance would never be about nuance or emotion or complexity. It would be about posture, silhouette, and camera angles. He had gone from portraying a human character to becoming a glorified mannequin. "I realized I was just an actor in a suit. Nothing more," he said. "And it was frustrating until I realized that my role in the film was just to show up and stand where I was told to." The physical strain was exhausting. The emotional toll was worse. He would come home from long days of shooting, shoulders sore, skin rubbed raw, ears ringing from hours of muffled dialogue. He couldn't breathe right. He couldn't connect with his co-stars the way he wanted. There was no freedom in the role, only constriction. He stayed silent. Contracts were signed. Promotions were scheduled. He had a job to do. And Warner Brothers made it clear. Batman needed to appear unshakable, invulnerable, perfect. "They made me hide this," Kilmer admitted near the end of his life. "They told me not to talk about it, not to tell people how it really felt, not to ruin the illusion. The illusion was profitable. It was glossy and marketable, but it came at a cost, and Kilmer bore it alone." He watched as Batman Forever became a hit. He smiled at interviews. He signed the toys. But inside, he was crumbling. The weight of the suit had done more than bruise his body. It had crushed a part of his spirit, a part that once believed being Batman would feel like flying. Instead, it felt like falling. And so when the offer came for a sequel, Batman and Robin, he declined. Not out of arrogance, not out of spite, but because he couldn't face the suit again. He couldn't be that silent shadow, that hollowed-out hero. He had dreamed of becoming Batman, and once he did, he couldn't wait to escape him. The crumbling of a dream. In the eyes of the public, Batman Forever was a triumphant return of the Dark Knight. It soared at the box office, earning over $330 million worldwide. Fans showed up in droves. Theaters buzzed with excitement, and children left showings begging for Batman toys. Warner Brothers celebrated. Joel Schumacher, the director, embraced the film's campy, neon-soaked tone, and Val Kilmer, clad in the most recognizable superhero costume on Earth, was suddenly everywhere. But for Kilmer, the success rang hollow. He was supposed to feel fulfilled. He had reached the mountaintop, secured a legacy, lived the dream every boy with a comic book had entertained. Yet, night after night, he stared into hotel mirrors, wondering why he felt so empty. Why the role that promised him so much felt like it had taken everything. It wasn't just the physical weight of the suit. It was the psychological shift that haunted him. Batman had always symbolized resilience, control, and mystery, but playing him had left Kilmer feeling powerless, constrained, and unseen. He didn't feel like a superhero. He felt like a man screaming inside a silent chamber, his voice unheard beneath layers of molded rubber and studio expectations. To the world, he was Batman. But to himself, he was vanishing. Behind the scenes, the environment wasn't always supportive. The pressure was immense. He was expected to fill the void left by Michael Keaton, win over a passionate fanbase, and satisfy a studio laser-focused on profit. Every move was scrutinized, every smile rehearsed. He couldn't even voice his discomfort about the suit or the role without being labeled difficult. So, he kept quiet. Again. But silence has a cost. Kilmer began to resent the very thing he had once desired. Instead of waking up excited to become the Caped Crusader, he began to dread each day of filming. The suit didn't empower him. It robbed him of the art he loved. There was no room for spontaneity, for vulnerability, for acting. Every expression was hidden. Every scene choreographed around how the costume moved, not how he moved. He wasn't being asked to be Batman, just to look like him. He did what professionals do. He endured. But when the production wrapped, he walked away from Gotham with a heavy heart. The whispers of a sequel, Batman and Robin, grew louder. The studio wanted him back, but by then, something inside Kilmer had broken. Quietly and completely. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry. He was exhausted. That's when he made the decision that shocked Hollywood. He would not return. The official reason given to the press was scheduling conflicts, a tidy, vague explanation that concealed the truth. In reality, Kilmer had made a quiet vow to himself. Never again would he sacrifice who he was for what he looked like. The experience had changed him, not in the ways fame was supposed to, but in deeper, more haunting ways. In later interviews, he gave hints. "I didn't quit Batman," he once said. "Batman quit me." For years, he avoided talking about it. He moved on to other projects, some successful, others not. He rediscovered his love for theater, for storytelling on his own terms. But still, the shadow of the Batsuit lingered. It followed him in interviews, in fan mail, in random airport encounters where strangers would still call him Batman. He would smile politely. He always did. But inside, he carried the secret weight of what the role had done to him. Only in his final years, facing the decline of his health, reflecting on his journey, did he finally begin to speak. Not to tear anything down, but to be honest, to free himself from the illusion. "They made me hide this," he said. "Back then, you weren't allowed to break character, even off-screen, especially if that character sold $1 billion in merchandise." His voice had grown raspy due to throat cancer, but his words hit with more clarity than ever. "I loved Batman, I still do, but that suit, it taught me that sometimes dreams come true, and they still break you." Val Kilmer had once dreamed of becoming Batman. He had no idea it would nearly cost him Val Kilmer. That revelation didn't diminish his legacy. It deepened it. Because behind the mask, behind the hero, was a man who paid a price few ever saw. While the suit definitely played on his personal relationship with the role, there was another hurdle that Kilmer had to overcome. And this one would not be as easy. Beating the legend. Val Kilmer found himself at a unique crossroads, especially in the shadow of Michael Keaton's iconic portrayal of the character in the previous two Batman films. Kilmer's journey to donning the cape and cowl was not one he initially sought out, yet he found himself under immense pressure to not only live up to Keaton's legacy, but also to appease a fan base who had formed a deep attachment to the previous Batman. Keaton had become a fan favorite due to his darker, more brooding take on the character in Batman, 1989, and Batman Returns, 1992. His portrayal had an almost mythic quality, and fans were fiercely protective of his version of the Caped Crusader. So when Kilmer was cast as the new Batman, the expectations were high, and there was a significant risk of alienating fans who viewed Keaton as irreplaceable. Kilmer, though, was well aware of this challenge. He later admitted to feeling immense pressure to fill Keaton's shoes, especially with the franchise's substantial fan base eagerly awaiting the next installment. The pressure was not only external, but also internal. Kilmer had always been someone who sought to take on roles that offered depth and complexity. While Keaton's Batman was widely praised for its introspective and tortured portrayal of the Dark Knight, Kilmer's take had to balance that legacy with the more lighthearted and adventurous tone that director Joel Schumacher envisioned for Batman Forever. Kilmer quickly learned that this was no easy task, especially considering the high expectations surrounding his performance. On set, Kilmer found himself both intimidated and inspired by his fellow actors, particularly Jim Carrey, Tommy Lee Jones, and Nicole Kidman. Carrey and Jones were well known for their larger-than-life performances, bringing an almost cartoonish energy to their roles as the Riddler and Two-Face, respectively. Kilmer, on the other hand, was confined by the limitations of the Batman costume, which was notoriously uncomfortable and stiff, leaving him feeling restricted. His co-stars, however, seemed to thrive within the over-the-top nature of the film, unburdened by the physical constraints of their costumes. Kilmer acknowledged that, in comparison, his role often felt like it required less action, more internal reflection, and more subtlety. Despite this, Kilmer still found a way to bring depth to the role. He believed that Batman's psychological complexity should not be overshadowed by the vibrant, explosive nature of the film. Kilmer's Bruce Wayne, Batman, was more vulnerable than Keaton's, grappling with themes of family, redemption, and personal growth. He played the role with a certain level of restraint, which was praised by some but criticized by others for not living up to the more intense portrayals that had come before. While Batman Forever was seen as a departure from the darker tones of its predecessors, Kilmer's portrayal of Batman was met with mixed reactions. Some appreciated his more emotional take on the character, while others wished for a return to the gritty, dark Batman they had come to know. Regardless, Kilmer's portrayal was an attempt to balance the demands of fans and the evolving direction of the franchise. Legacy in silence. As time wore on, Val Kilmer's life took a series of unexpected turns, each one pushing him further away from the Batman persona that had once defined his career. After the tumultuous experience on Batman Forever, Kilmer slowly withdrew from the limelight, not in a defiant bid for privacy, but in a quiet search for peace. The world had moved on. New actors donned the Batsuit, each one bringing their own interpretation to Gotham's dark night. But Kilmer's portrayal of the character lingered in the collective memory, regarded by many as part of a unique era in Batman's cinematic history. Still, as much as fans appreciated his contribution, Kilmer was no longer interested in living in the shadow of that persona. He had stepped away from Hollywood's grind, but it was more than a desire for freedom. It was a need to regain his own identity. Kilmer's passion for acting never waned. He continued to perform, but more selectively. He returned to his roots in theater, where he could express himself without the constraints of a superhero suit. He worked on projects that allowed him to breathe life into characters that were his own, characters he could truly own. But as he did, the truth about his time in the Batsuit remained an unspoken part of his story, something that he had buried deeply. It wasn't until later in life, during his ongoing battle with throat cancer, that Kilmer began to speak candidly about the experience that had both shaped and scarred him. The years had granted him the space to reflect, and with it came the clarity he needed to finally tell the truth. He no longer felt the need to protect Warner Brothers or the image of Batman. His focus had shifted to his own healing, to his own understanding of the toll that role had taken. Kilmer's health had deteriorated significantly, and as his voice became more strained, he found it harder to mask his true feelings. In interviews and memoirs, he began to open up about the dark side of playing Batman, the psychological and physical toll that few could ever have imagined. "I played Batman in a suit," he said, "but I never played Bruce Wayne. I never got to show who he really was. All that mattered was the suit, the brand. That's all the world wanted to see. And in the end, I lost myself in it." This was the crux of the heartbreak. The role that should have elevated him, cementing his place among Hollywood's greats, had instead left him feeling like a mere vessel, a mannequin for an icon, a living symbol whose humanity had been stripped away, bit by bit, with every frame captured. And as Kilmer's health worsened, fans who had once idolized him began to see him in a new light, not just as the man who donned the cape and cowl, but as someone who had paid a price for that legacy. The truth was out. He was no longer the invincible Batman they had worshipped. He was a man, fragile, battling illness, grappling with the weight of his past and the choices he had made. Kilmer's honesty about his experience resonated with many. His decision to share the emotional and physical toll of his time as Batman brought a deeper layer to his legacy, one that wasn't defined by the flash of neon lights or the roar of Batmobiles. It was defined by his humanity. The man behind the mask was not just a superhero. He was a real person, vulnerable and honest. Even as Kilmer's voice grew quieter, his influence remained powerful. His openness about the pain of playing Batman sparked conversations about the darker side of fame, the pressures on actors, and the cost of iconic roles. Fans, many of whom had grown up with Kilmer's Batman, began to see him in a different light, not as the figure that stood tall against Gotham's villains, but as someone who had sacrificed his own well-being for a part that demanded more than he could give. And though Kilmer's journey was fraught with difficulty, it was also a journey of redemption. He had come to understand the cost of fame, of iconography, of being turned into a symbol, but he had also come to understand himself in ways that many others never could. He had become more than just Batman. He had become a man who, despite it all, had found the strength to speak the truth, no matter how painful it was. As Val Kilmer faced the final chapters of his life, the lessons of his Batman years, and the toll of his health struggles, one thing remained undeniable. His legacy was not just about the roles he played on screen. It was about the truth he uncovered in the silence, the honesty he brought to the surface, the courage to face not just the world's expectations, but his own inner demons. Kilmer's legacy, like Batman's, would endure, but in the end, it wasn't about the bat symbol on his chest. It was about the strength of the man who had worn it, and the vulnerability that came with telling his story, with saying, "This is who I really am." What does Kilmer's experience teach us about the hidden sacrifices behind the roles we idolize? Share your thoughts in the comments below.